for those able to join, thank you for joining. Again, I'm Patrick Filkin, Senior Research Analyst at IDC. Very excited to talk about all of these wonderful topics today in a 60-minute format, or if we will. So I'm joined today by a very high-level, capable panel to discuss these. We have Michael Back, VP and Corporate Officer of Ericsson, Ronnie Vasishta, SVP Telecom at NVIDIA, and then Shekhar Iyer, EVP and GM Telco and Edge Cloud at VMware. So we can start by saying this, that the question why 5G matters in a world of IoT, VR, AR, AI, and Edge is not an easy question to answer. So what I will try to do for you all today is set the stage for that. And once we've set the stage for that, we'll move into some specific discussions around these technologies. Again, each one of these technologies could demand its own 60 minutes. But the understanding today that we want you all to come across with is why 5G actually matters. So with that, I'd like to go through a quick presentation before moving to some individual discussions. So again, why does 5G matter in a world of IoT and Edge, AI, AR, and VR? And I asked myself that question when putting together this presentation, and I really came across one thing in my mind, and it's multiplied innovation, right? So as we move to the next slide, this is a slide that many of you maybe have already seen. It's sort of a banner slide for how IDC discusses technology and digital transformation from a very high level. And I think it does a really good job of setting the stage around why 5G matters and what's going on out in the broader world that 5G can help address. So what we like to do to set the stage is to talk about what happened nearly a decade ago. And IDC sort of framed what started to happen after the 2000 break, sort of the emergence of 4 pillars, things we like to call new technologies, delivery model, IT access at scale, right? And these 4 pillars were cloud, mobile, social, and big data, right? So when we think of it in that context, we had all these fantastic technologies starting to emerge in silos, right? We had cloud access, LTE, 3G transitioning to LTE, social networks, and then of course, all the data that came about that we are still somewhat to this day trying to figure out what to do with. As we move into today's sort of landscape, it's not just experimentation, it's multiplied innovation. And then I think when you frame it like that, you start to answer that question. Why does 5G matter? We need help here, right? We have things like AI, IoT, blockchain, new standardized natural interfaces that allow applications to flow more freely than ever. We have the advent of new platforms and communities. It's all very exciting. It's all very intense, and it's all very complex. And so when we move into multiplied innovation, which again is where we're at today, if we go down to the bottom of this slide, we also see something else happening. We have a new 5G network. And so, what I'd like to spend a little bit of time going through is how those two come together. How does 5G come together with this new platform and community? And as such, we can go to the next slide. So again, a wave of multiplied innovation emerges. And, when we talk about 5G, I think we get sort of hamstrung into the pipe discussion, right? And I'm just being honest. We start to talk about how do we think of a new network, right? Well, is it just an upgrade from an old network? Well, not really. And I think to really understand that concept, we need to understand why the network was designed, how it was designed. So we go to what's actually happening in the real world. We have new insights being driven by AI-based automation, real-time decisions. We have insights everywhere, right? We have IoT endpoint sensors. There's so much information being generated out there in the technology ecosystem. It's a problem, and it's still something that the industry is trying to manage through now. We have the new dynamic edge, right? We have more reach than ever. We see service providers of all shape and form, cloud providers, wireline, wireless, enterprises themselves defining this new edge, right? Again, driven largely by the ability to host applications and do processing in areas that we didn't do before. This is a problem, but again, when we think of it in that context, we start to understand maybe how 5G can help. We have new development, new app explosion. I'll cover this a little bit more, but we have applications coming to the fore across all areas, an ecosystem to itself, API stacks, new applications hosted all over the technology domain. So again, another challenge that needs to be addressed. We have new expectations, societal norms evolve. I think, this is the obligatory COVID-19 sort of point to make. Digital transformation accelerated in many new areas, new societal norms, new ways to build networks, new ways to design IT, new challenges driven a lot by the COVID-19 that has accelerated this. Then of course you have to make mention of trust, right? Any new IT, whether it's an ICT, IT domain, network domain, it needs to be secure. And so when we think about that in the context of 5G, a pretty strong legacy of 3GPP helping to do that. So let's move to the next slide. The point this slide drives forward is some actual data around what I'm talking about. So when we look at applications, and again, when we talk about 5G, I think there's one side that talks a lot about the capabilities of 5G, but not so much about what it is designed to do, right? It's not just about bits and bytes, it's about supporting new applications. It's about supporting new use cases. What does it unlock, right? So some data that I think drives that point home is we see 50% growth in the typical application portfolio. We see massive interdependencies being built. Each business application already has 4 to 8 other app dependencies. We see 58% plus of all resources at remote edge or provided data centers. Again, what is the network backbone? How does the network help solve that problem? And then we see 47% of applications will be built using modular development frameworks. So all that said together, I think it becomes clear that for those of us who spend an awful lot of time in networking, the networking needs to evolve too, right? The story for the network needs to change. And I think 5G helps make that story happen. And sort of what I want to do on the last slide here before I bring in the panelists is just talk a little bit about 5G itself. So let's go to the next slide. And so when I talk to people about 5G, I sort of have been doing this now for several years. I think of it in 2 ways, right? How do I define 5G? Yeah, we can define it as a new radio technology. That's a starting point, right? We have a new radio, we have a new packet core, we have a new way the network is designed. And that's a good way to start, right? But here's the thing. If we tie it into everything I just went over, new applications, a platform approach, it's clear that the network of old is just not ready to handle that. And so when I talk about 5G, I say, yeah, new radio, but I also say it's a new era. And why is that? The 5G design is built cloud native and distributed, software mediated, it's a microservices, service-based architecture. It's designed to be programmable, increasingly seen leveraging artificial intelligence automation to solve complexity, to help address all these different use cases and applications we see coming to the fore. And then sort of the last point I want to make, and I know a lot of people have heard this before, but it truly is an idea. And I want to sort of underscore this, is the evolution to 5G as a platform. There's a lot of capabilities baked into the 5G core network that we haven't really unlocked yet, that we're just starting to unlock now. So with that, let's move to the last slide. And let's start by describing what we're going to talk about today. So we have 3 sessions to break this down, right? The first one we'll sort of talk about IoT and edge and how 5G intersects with that. Things like industrial IoT, telco edge, MEC, it's a good lane to dive into. We also want to talk about machine learning, AI, and 5G. A bunch of buzzwords, right? But that demand some attention because AI is necessitated, of course, when you're using 5G. And then the final discussion will be great. So we've had this technology discussion. Let's talk about use cases. Let's talk about what 5G can actually be used for. And we highlight AR, VR, but also note that we've moved past simple definition of what 5G is. We're starting to see use cases in different regions. We're actually starting to define what the 5G network platform can do. And we have a better idea of what it is actually going to do. So with that, I think we should start the discussion around IoT and edge. Great. So the first discussion is, why does 5G matter to IoT and edge? And Shakar, I think you're a great place to start this discussion based on what I've seen you and VMware doing. So, a couple questions here that you can touch upon, but of course, feel free to bring your own flavor to the discussion. Why does 5G matter to IoT and edge? Why should an enterprise care? What are the telcos actually doing? How does promise of 5G MEC unlock new applications? And then, of course, we'd love to hear your view on sort of who's playing in this space, who's driving it, who's going to help make this IoT edge and 5G intersection happen. So over to you.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. So first of all, thanks to everyone for having me here. Just an esteemed panel and a fascinating topic, something that I could often talk hours on end. With that in mind, let me just kind of touch on perhaps the more important things. So first, I wanted to actually piggyback off of what you started, which is, in fact, there's a little bit of the over the surface recognition of 5G as a technology that brings us better bandwidth, lower latency, improved jitter characteristics, et cetera, that is spawning a new set of applications. But then there's a whole lot of stuff that's happening really underneath the covers. I mean, I would call this effectively the infrastructure for 5G or the platform for 5G. And if you look at that, things like bringing wireless and wireline networks together, having service providers and operators now having moved up the chain of virtualizing and cloudifying their own network infrastructure, making sure that security and privacy are built in. There's an explosion of data. So there are, I would say, numerous catalysts that are somewhat fortuitously coming together underneath the covers with this new level of technology that is going to enable us to take the benefits of 5G and then translate that to just fascinating improvement for everyone, both on the consumer and enterprise side. The way I like to describe this is there are two worlds that haven't previously collided. One is kind of the cloud world, and you've got a lot of the hyperscalers, public cloud entities, as well as private clouds within enterprises. And then you have the comms world. I mean, all of the telcos and what they have been doing, everyone from AT&T, Verizon, Vodafone to Dish Network, et cetera. And you now have, with 5G, these two worlds coming together. Another way to understand this phenomenon is that the pendulum for compute, network, storage moved all the way from what was like inside the firewall private enterprises to all the way up to hyperscale public. And now you kind of have the pendulum swinging back somewhere in the middle saying distributed architectures are where the future is. So if you now process this, you're going to have this rich fabric called the edge. The edge is effectively going to bring all of your capabilities in terms of compute, network, storage, processing, about as near as you want it for any application, and allow you to now create and deliver a new set of applications on top of this fabric. I am actually super optimistic that even as we are now getting into the throes of deploying 5G and as cloud and comms come together, we're going to have programmable API-based interfaces that every developer is going to have access to create a rich new set of applications on top of this edge infrastructure. And this is catalyzed by 5G, okay? Now, what are the kinds of applications? So IoT ends up being one of the big consumers or big use cases for something like this. I mean, we've talked about IoT for some time, billions and billions of devices and things that are unleashing, whatever, refrigerators and thermostats talking to the internet. But in practice, I would say, as you are looking at things like autonomous driving or industrial automation or retail and manufacturing getting automated, the use cases are starting to get very real. 5G is now becoming real. The combination of cloud and compute to create this new edge is becoming very real. So we are sitting at the, I'd say, genesis or just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what is about to unleash on us as this fabulous kind of fabric opportunity or platform opportunity for all of us collectively to go in, make it, I'd say, performant, real, and practical for developers globally to build applications on top of this. And I'm actually quite anxious to see how large industrial corporations are going to take advantage of this as they automate their infrastructure using IoT, or for that matter, even consumer applications, whether those are things like gaming or talking to simple devices in the home. But as an infrastructure provider, for example, we at VMware, as well as with our partners at Dell, are super committed to supporting this, making sure that this is in fact an open architecture so that people can write to it. And the programmability of this thing is just fascinating. I also think that, to your earlier question, Patrick, there could well be a new cast of winners here. I mean, the previous cloud wars, you know, the names that are quoted often as the cloud leaders. And that doesn't actually include the telcos and the cable providers and people who came in from the comms domain. I think the cards are going to get reshuffled as we look forward. And there is a high likelihood that there is a new combination of players, partners that could actually be prevalent as the winners in the upcoming 5G evolution. So with that, let me kind of throw it back to you, Patrick. And if you have any specific questions, I'm happy to answer those. But I wanted to give you that as an introduction to the topic.
Yeah, I love everything you said. You said it much more eloquently than I would have. So it's, the ecosystem is extremely exciting, and I would agree with everything you said. The people coming to the 5G trough, if you will, to start to drink from where I sit it looks different. There's different players coming around, sort of starting to sniff around about what 5G, and I want to underscore what you said. The exposure to the network as a platform and the application developers willing to come in and start to really, they want access to the platform and they want to design around it. And that is what I'm seeing as well. I wonder, Michael, would you, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, as a leader in the 5G space as well. So you have a couple minutes, and I'd love to hear your thoughts around the intersection of all these technologies.
Absolutely. So I think for us, this has been a super interesting journey. We are, of course, experienced from all the transitions we saw in 3G and 4G. Who could expect the app revolution that we had when we introduced 4G and so on? I think we see something even bigger now. So for me, the interest from other sectors and from politicians, if you look at World Economic Forum, we had a demonstration in Davos this year of industrial robots together with ABB communicating. All these things, I think, couldn't have happened before. And also the interest for our industry to actually be this platform of innovation for industry specialists, manufacturing, automotive, harbors. We've seen use in mines. We have so many use cases that I think it's kind of meaningless for us to sit and think of all the use cases. That we're looking very much about the enabling capabilities. And then we tried very early from our side, given that we had the first trial systems, test systems for 5G already in 2014. We started to work with manufacturing industry was quite early, but also some of the mines, to really demonstrate what it would mean to them if you could really have this low latency, high performance, secured, maybe local service with your network slices that they never had before, to really get them to really ask for this service when it's now available from commercial operators. So to me, this transition in the end, I think, even if it's not there today, will, I think, be a bigger thing that we talk about for many years than 4G ever was, even if we had the whole app economy started and so on. And there's both a private angle, of course. Still, the main use of 5G is people with smartphones in Korea and a lot of other countries. But you start to see use of industrial versions. You start to see the early adopters, of course, in the car industry, for example, really waiting for seeing what this can do for them in the way that you connect the car to a rolling data center, basically, in a way that we have never seen. So I think the next 5 and even more, up to 10 years, will be super exciting. And of course, we will be in the middle of it, but I think we should be aware that we will not come up with all the applications. I think I'm absolutely sure about that. Someone else will do that.
Sure, I think everything you said makes sense. There's a lot to be written about it. And right now we're certainly in, as I had sort of alluded to before, there's still some lingering experimentation. Yes, we're in
Yeah, great. Thanks, Patrick. So, I think the terms 5G and AI do get used often independently. And if you think about the confluence of factors that are happening now, which is really both 5G and AI are in the early innings of their use and deployment. Perhaps AI has, because it's been so nascent, but obviously already so broad, is being used in multiple different areas and applications. And I think that really to make 5G really take advantage of all that 5G has to offer, AI is a necessity. And I think today most people have realized that AI can add value in some of the over-the-top services. And you see that today with things like gaming, for instance. AI and cloud gaming today becoming quite prevalent. We're also seeing that early days with XR or AR, VR. And I think we had a demonstration which I thought was really cool in Coventry University in the UK, where we were able to, together with partners, put a AI solution together that allowed medical students, to be able to really be immersive in their studies. So you don't have to use cadavers anymore. You can actually get inside the body, view the body, view the organs, etc., and be totally immersive wherever you are on the campus. So things like that, I think are well understood in terms of the concept and the advantages they can bring to everyday users. I think some of the things that are more infrastructure related are perhaps also as important. The ability to manage the complexity of and bring to life the release of, say, RHEL 16. Right. If you think about the data traffic that's happened, to the latency management, the radio management, so real-time or near real-time RIC, for instance, to really bring that to life, AI adds a tremendous value to that. Beamforming with massive MIMO, the ability to have self-learning networks and self-optimization in the network requires AI to bring it to life. If you think about the benefits of 5G, 10x decrease in latency, 10x increase in performance, the amount of data that's going to come through, and compute capability that's going to have to happen in the baseband, for instance, like scheduling, channel estimation, lends itself to AI and machine learning techniques. One thing I would say is that the edge is a term that gets used a lot, but what really is the edge? It could be a base station today. It could be obviously an enterprise, private or networks or public networks, next generation central office. It obviously could be cloud. And what you want to do is you want to be able to take the same platform, the same compute capability, the same application layer, the same APIs, and run it across that and provision it for the use case that's important. And I think that's going to require a level of intelligence on the application layer and understanding the data traffic to be able to do that self-provisioning in the network. So I think it's very exciting times. It is very early. As I said, we're in the early innings today. And I think we're going to be, these kind of panels are going to be very exciting because we're going to hear a lot more about how deployment starts to happen, both in the network and in the services.
Thank you. That's a good, and you sort of brought to mind two ways that I look at it is when, as an infrastructure analyst, I spend a lot of time, decomposing reference architectures and understanding how AI helps solve, say a telco or any service providers helps make their life easier. As we move down the automation continuum, we insert AI where we can insert it and it helps make their lives easier. And we start to realize that, this sort of holy grail of zero touch networking, right? Will it ever be zero touch? Maybe. But then what you brought to light, of course, is great. So the network is now adapting to what the world is presenting it. And then you can also think of AI in the context of the service layer, right? The services themselves will need perhaps some AI-based assist. So we still have some time to discuss this. And I know that I get so many questions around AI. Why should I care about AI? Where does it really make an impact? So maybe Shaker, do you, mostly probably from the infrastructure, but please feel free to discuss. I would love to hear your thoughts on how AI helps this platform come together that we were talking about, this 5G network platform that is under the hood, much is going on. I'm just wondering your thoughts around how AI helps that story come together for the service providers.
Yeah, so fundamentally, I would say we look at AI perhaps in two camps. I think one is there is the notion of how, in fact, everything we are all doing is actually going to help the AI industry, if you will, in terms of better deployment and use of AI. So at root of this is the fact that AI by itself is better done in a distributed architecture. I mean, if you look at it in terms of what the training algorithms need, as well as what inferences need, there is a notion of how you can, in fact, accommodate certain things by sending it way back to the data center that has like good backhaul connectivity and gobs of data that can get processed there to create learning algorithms more effectively. But then when you've got to either take action on it or create inferences and implement it, those need to happen potentially at edge points. The other difference that we've seen working with particularly telcos and service providers globally is that there are differences in terms of fiber and connectivity between, for example, the US and Europe. So in some cases, you might actually be able to take a bunch of intelligence and move it to the cloud. In other cases, you might have to have intelligence distributed locally at the points of consumption. So all of this speaks to how an edge architecture can be used more effectively to create and deploy AI algorithms. Then the opposite is, how do you actually take AI and use it more effectively to get better analysis and analytical output from things like data that's captured? So simple examples are, as you are creating and managing an environment in the cloud, whether that's a private cloud or a hyperscale public or an edge cloud, what can you use as AI-infused mechanisms for better automation of that environment, better operator economics? How can you kind of reduce truck rolls and so on? And this is now going to become a big part of how we all leverage AI. We're doing things, in fact, we at VMware, we acquired a company called Ohana as an example, where we get data from radio access networks and use that and have AI added to it to get information back to operators to figure out how they can, for example, better direct antennas or use capacity more smartly and more efficiently. So these are the two things I would say. One is, how can we actually take 5G and the edge architecture and bring it to the benefit of AI? And on a separate note, how can we take AI and bring it to the benefit of all of the applications like industrial IoT, et cetera, that are going to leverage all the capacities that we bring, including what, for example, NVIDIA and Ericsson bring to the table in this campus.
Yeah, fantastic. I think you framed it well. And the takeaway that I heard from you was when you think of 5G and edge together, and the 5G platform is not just a centralized service provider, it's a distributed platform. As such, there's so much different areas where data is being cultivated theoretically. And so when you think of AI as its own sort of, I don't know, sure I should do this, but you think of it as its own kind of ambient, program, sort of what you're looking around trying to find data to get better and make decisions. It makes sense that it goes well with 5G. And so, we still have a couple of minutes here. I think Michael, I thought maybe we would overtouch the AI, but if you want to add anything in around your thoughts, especially the unique view you have with the Ericsson view, happy to give you a couple minutes to talk about it.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think for us, we are not active as an AI specialist like maybe many IT companies. So we mainly use AI to operate and run the network more efficiently for our customers. So I think some of the examples that came up recently is what we are doing actually today. So I think the first thing we did was the simple steps, as you say, called automation and so on in our managed service operation to actually automate manual tasks. But then the whole managed service business for us has been the first place where we introduce AI routines to really solve very complex problems that has been hanging around in the telecom industry for a long time. So we have a big list of use cases that is now being able to, we can replicate for many customers around the globe. And there is things you can do already today. And of course, we see a huge development in this area over time. And I think what we're utilizing is, of course, our role in the middle of the ecosystem, that we have unique knowledge about the network. So when it comes to radio optimization, we talked about antenna tilting and so on. Many of these things that we've been doing for 20, 30 years from GSM and onwards. It's a competence that is possible to actually build into AI algorithms to replicate that at a scale that has been really, really costly and time consuming when we look back to how we optimize networks. So the whole network optimization is one of the obvious tasks that benefits very early from AI, but also resource utilization. I think for us, if we can help our customers utilize the most expensive resource they have, being spectrum, in a more efficient way by knowing when we can change traffic depending on time of day. We can do many things related to energy consumption by not switching networks on when there is no usage and so on. There is so many things where competence is available within our company, but also other companies in the industry that we can really feed these algorithms with to do something that we haven't been able to do, even if we had knowledge inside the industry. I think it's really taking that knowledge to work 24/7 now. So for us, mainly within the networks and the way we run our networks for our customers, and not so much going into the application space. We think other people do that even better.
Excellent. I think we gave, in 12 minutes, a quick rundown of 5G and AI. That's hopefully, something that makes sense to the folks out there, and something they wrap their head around, maybe learn something, why 5G and AI matter. So here we go, entering the last sort of block, if you will, the third discussion portion. And I thought about this, and I thought maybe this might be the hardest one of all. What 5G discussion would be complete without trying to guess what 5G does for revenue? What does it unlock for use cases? And we did highlight, AR, VR, I think is a good place to start. It's a more near-term, tangible thing that both consumers and enterprises can wrap their head around. But here's a question for you, and let's stay with you, Michael. Where has your thoughts changed around 5G? I know when we first started talking about use cases, there was all these fit by access charts where we can do consumer use cases first, but then we'll have, remote self-driving automobiles and remote surgery. And I think I'd like to hear from where you're at today now in 2020, where we have release 15, we have commercial deployments, we have countries like South Korea and others in the US starting to get some coverage around 5G and see that. Maybe too early to still put a stake in the ground, and that's fine. I'm just wondering how you, as a leader in the industry, again, where do you really see use case development for 5G?
Yeah, so I'll start a little bit with the AR VR and then take it slightly broader. So we have been looking at this since I talked about 2014 when we started with the early test systems and so on. Of course, AR VR was one of the cases where the whole setup of 5G, bringing possibilities for shorter latencies, maybe down to 1 millisecond, was an obvious thing to really create a true experience that you couldn't do before. And it really has to do with the basic technology of 5G, where we introduce a lot of flexibilities with the sub-carrier spacing and so on, that really leads to that the frames we transmit can be shorter than in LTE. So I think this is, of course, one of the reasons why AR VR came up really high. We have been doing a lot of work technically, but to start on the revenue generation side, we have a part in Ericsson that we call consumer and industry labs. That is really people that is working with, for example, interviewing people on the street for where do we see technology going from also consumers' eyes and so on. And we are launching a lot of reports in these areas, and AR VR has been recently a lot of work around. So we recently launched a report called Merged Reality, where we really talk about 7 out of 10 consumers basically see that many aspects of working life, healthcare, media, and so on will dramatically change over the next couple of years due to AR, VR, and these devices becoming more attractive, more easy to integrate with instead of being a bit cumbersome as they're seen today. 3 out of 5 basically see that when we go back to work now after COVID and so on, office spaces, classrooms and so on will basically completely change and not go back to the way they were. And AR VR is of course part of this. The whole technology platform that we bring with 5G is part of this. So I think we see from tourisms, where there is of course a lot done already in more simple ways of using technology, will really be able to create an experience that we have never seen before. So this is seen as one of the maybe most fundamental visual changes when it comes to utilizing all this technology, AI and so on, as we talked about, also in the eyes of the consumer. But there is more to be done. I think a lot of people see this as something we can demonstrate and so on, but still a little bit too cumbersome and bulky and so on with the headset. But it's really coming down to something that we can start to demonstrate in which way it will impact society. And many of our customers started to utilize this early. So I think I've been working a lot with, and also in Korea over the years, and it's super interesting because you have some of the most best networks in the world, some of the most dense networks in the world already for 4G. You've seen an enormous uptake in traffic of a couple of times, even if they already from 4G days had maybe 10 gigabits per month per user and so on. And now the operators there are offering not only 5G services in a broad scale with a more or less nationwide network, they're also offering bundling with VR equipment, AR equipment, and so on. And also they offer it together with services and applications. A lot of focus on gaming, a lot of focus on entertainment, a lot of focus on sports, camera angles, and so on. Things we have been talking about, but really making them useful for the end user. So to me, it's actually coming a bit earlier than we would see if you go back a couple of years. And now I think it's really realistic to see that the whole pandemic now is accelerating things, as you said before. That will clearly happen in this area as well. There is certain development that needs to happen maybe on the device side and applications, but it's basic technology is there, the 5G platform is there, and so on. I was fortunate enough to be not only in Korea but in Japan when there was this World Rugby Championships in end of last year, where also Docomo demonstrated on these fairly big screens of 5G phones, where you had one main camera and then 6 smaller cameras that you could choose between and so on. Even if it's not VR exactly, it's a very good way of communicating how you could use this to enhance life for end users. And I think in these studies we have done, we really see that this is a core component in this, what we say more or less 31 trillion opportunity to really get revenues to the ICT industry from the private sector, from the consumer space in up to 2030. So we see that's super important as the kind of way to view technologies going forward. I think many of the technologies we have today is maybe limiting the way we can use technology, and AR VR is clearly a way to make it easier to consume these advanced technologies that we talk about. And this is the private space, as we see, as a fairly dominant piece, a big piece of revenue for the service providers today. But of course, most of them are building this then 5G platform with good coverage and so on, including maybe private networks, which is of course the same infrastructure that you can then use to serve the enterprise users. We're talking about the industrial use cases. We have a lot of ideas around AR, VR coming up early in manufacturing, for example, inside the mines, in dangerous environments and so on. So we have super simple use cases like just utilizing the manual in front of your eyes instead of reading the manual on site, but taking that all the way to really advanced use cases, interacting with machines and so on in the enterprise arena. So to me, 5G also demonstrates a fantastic opportunity to, in one investment, do a lot of the work that you historically have been building separate networks for before. Cable networks, industrial Ethernet solutions in manufacturing. You've been using Wi-Fi in some cases. You typically built separate networks for security networks, police and fire departments and so on. I think we have a great opportunity now to utilize all the spectrum we have available to build one network as a national infrastructure that can actually, through network slicing, then serve all these different needs without having to repeat the investment for every service. So to me, this is one of the key enablers, is the whole slicing and the ability to really provide virtual networks to anyone that would actually like to feel that you have control over your own network with your own specifics, with the security that you want, with the latency that you're able to pay for and so on. So to me, it's a revolution when it comes to consumers, as well as we've been talking about industry digitalization. So it's going to be a very interesting exercise. And I think we don't know yet exactly which will go first. Initially, of course, the smartphones is a very simple use case. So they are per definition first out. But what comes next? I think it's a tight race between some of these really cool consumer applications and what's going to happen in healthcare, automotive, manufacturing, mining, harbors, private networks, you name it. So I think we're unleashing an enormous potential for innovation here that I think I haven't seen in my 30-year working life.
Noted. And I appreciate the passion. I can tell you're very excited about, there's unknowns, but there's a lot we do know. And I think Ronnie, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I think you have some good ground floor, opinions on maybe how your thoughts on 5G have evolved over the last couple of years now that we're seeing commercial deployments.
Yeah, I mean, we see obviously the precursor, because ultimately you need chips, platform systems, way ahead of deployment, and we start working on those things very early on, and some of the use cases are known and many are unknown. And so I think one of the things that Michael mentioned is the ability to really plan for the future in terms of use cases, and therefore the revenue that can be driven by those use cases. I think the perhaps the easier ones to comprehend are those ones that are in the network management space and the spectral efficiency and how to get more out of the spectrum. But the ones that I think are a little bit more challenging are how to take advantage of the latency, how to take advantage of some of the performance gains. And what that really has done, I think, is now spawn a whole new ecosystem. I think it was mentioned earlier how there are many new players coming into this market. And if you think about the software, the SDKs that are being utilized with APIs across that continuum of edge and cloud, we're seeing a host of new entrants coming into the market in terms of developing applications. Of course, cloud gaming is kind of the first that came into play, but the moves with Industry 4.0, we're seeing that's becoming very real now, with spectrum actually being purchased in private networks, for instance, and deployment of real-time management of robots and robotics, the smart cities that we're engaged with today, and retail, auto checkouts. A lot of these applications are being created by companies that weren't in existence 2-3 years ago. And what they really need is access to platforms. They don't want to focus on how do I write at a low level. They want to be able to write their algorithms and their value add on top of platforms that can move across the entire ecosystem. And so we've started to now engage with a lot more of those developers. And what's been interesting is going back to AI, as you bring AI into many of these applications and the ability to program, saying in CUDA, that adds a significant value with the hardware platform that can now provide the 5G release 15, release 16 advantages, and going forward into release 17 advantages, which is of course abstracted from the developers. I think Mikael mentioned earlier some of the reports that Ericsson has been able to provide and carry out, and I think that some of that data shows very clearly the potential use cases that are happening in people's minds to drive the monetization of this stack. Now, at the same time, let's be clear, it's a disruption, and we have to learn how to live within this disruption. And there will be changes in the ecosystem, the traditional ecosystems that existed, and we have to adapt. We as providers into this industry adapt with 5G and AI as well, and we have to learn to adapt. And I think what we're starting to see is a lot of that adaptation with new business models that are starting to be deployed. And what we really need is that, as I said, the platform ahead of time, and knowing the value of the 3GPP standards to be able to take full advantage of that platform.
Excellent. Appreciate that insight. Some key takeaways on that is this section is, there's a lot we still don't know. But I think when I look at what is being enabled, both from an infrastructure perspective and, as Ronnie, you brought up a good point, the ecosystem, you can see the first sort of ripples of change. Again, sort of different folks that traditionally were not as interested in or as involved in sort of 3GPP type technologies now coming to the front, whether that's a public, a consumer starting to look at it more and try to understand it, but really in the enterprise space and private networks and so on and so forth. There's a lot of potential, I think, out there. And the demand metrics at IDC that we look at backs that up. Our research indicates that 5G to a lot of people is not just a pipe. It is truly an enablement tool, and there's a lot of interest there, I think. So with that, I'd like to conclude, I guess, the three sort of targeted sessions. I appreciate that, the speakers and I had some discussions internally, and we said, how do we slice this up? This is just too broad. And I think you all did it very eloquently to the best we could do. With that said, I want to give you, the three of you, your own sort of, we have a time limit here. We have about maybe 6-7 minutes. So maybe try to keep it to 2 minutes, but each of you a chance to sort of give your final conclusion. And again, the whole point of this was to try to define, why does 5G matter? Why does 5G matter in the context of IoT and edge and AR, VR and AI? And so here's your 2 minutes to say whatever you want to say and help us understand why 5G matters. So please, let's start with Shaker. Bring us on home.
Great, thanks, Patrick. So maybe to sort of reiterate and summarize some of the thoughts, I do think, first of all, I think 5G is a fabulous sort of front-end catalyst, but as we all discovered, there are several things happening in concert with 5G that make it just the most opportune time for us collectively as an industry to think about everything from a reformatted set of new applications that are going to take advantage of this, to just improving everything from efficiency, economics, as well as global connectivity. Not the least of which is, of course, the unfortunate pandemic upon us and how that has actually just kind of caused us to, in some ways, come closer together, even as we are all getting sequestered in our own environments through things like remote and work at home and so on. So with that, I also think that there is there's an imminent reshuffling of cloud economics. And in particular, I would say we're quite fascinated at VMware and Dell to see this as a multi-cloud world. It's no longer going to be the domain of any single cloud provider to say, hey, we are king and this is exactly how it's going to work. We do see this as a very hybrid environment. We see the need for all of us to sort of hold hands and make sure that the programmability of these architectures, the openness of this infrastructure, is going to allow the creation of these applications. The third point I'd make is that enterprise business users are going to become a very, very prominent use case in 5G, leading to things like IoT and how does the industry benefit from that. And so as we kind of bring that together, I think to even the last discussion we had, I'm quite fascinated by all of the new uses of 5G and the and how revenue flows are going to be changed based on these new models of interaction and engagement, and the ability for us to support things, everything from automation use cases to, I don't know, drones flying around, to all of us communicating through AR and VR with each other. So thank you again. I think it's a fascinating topic. And as I said, we could talk for hours on end, but we are just at the beginning of this, of what I think is a great future for us as technologists.
Certainly. So let's go to Michael next. Give me 2 minutes, if you can. 2 minutes. And again, why does 5G matter in the context, of course, what we discussed today, but maybe we missed something. Maybe there's something you want to add to it.
I'll start with what we talked about. I think it's really, to me, the most prominent role to become this digital platform that I think we will use to digitalize almost all sector of society over some time to come now. That is something we have never done before, and not at all on one single scalable platform. I think, to me, that is the biggest change. Then, of course, in revenues and so on, as I said, the consumer side is going to be very important, but part of that is, of course, already known. I think the other part is what we will remember in 50 years as well. I think for me, what has been super interesting to be part of this journey, and as I said before, I've been in this industry a long time working through 2G. I was leading Ericsson's efforts in 3G. I've seen the device problems in introduction and so on. And the uptake we see in 5G now is quicker than we've seen as an uptake for any other technology. I think that's a very strong sign if we look at basically all regions of the world. Of course, practically we have time differences if you compare Korea to Africa and other parts of Asia and so on. But we see the same trend to be able to use the same scalable technology. To me, it's been super cool to be close to customers and see some of these real examples when it's really happening, and talk to the entrepreneurs, talk to the possible users from industries and what they see the technology can do for them. Coming back to gaming, I had this very interesting discussion with one of the CEOs in Silicon Valley for one of the startups and early leaders in the gaming industry. And he said that basically 5G can take away a big part of this issue we see, because again, the main gaming console now is the mobile phone. And all game developers are spending an enormous effort to compensate for that. The networks are basically crappy. They are uneven. People have different situations, so games doesn't really work. If you can provide a certain latency below 10 milliseconds, if you can provide a secure connection over 10 megabits or more, then you can basically change the whole way that you develop games. You don't have to download them basically on the phone. You can run streaming. You can basically expect that people have the same gaming situation instead of doing this enormous work of compensating and so on. So, of course, that is not the only thing, but it's a very good example of where having a certain performance, having a certain reliable performance, security, latency, and so on means that the whole industry that is using the technology will change. And I think we will see that over many of these industries too. So for us, I think 5G is and will continue to be seen even more as the biggest innovation platform ever.
Excellent. Good way to summarize it all. There's a lot to cover. So Ronnie, looks like you're the anchor. Please feel free to touch upon what we talked about, or if maybe there's something that we missed around why does 5G matter, please.
Sure. Let me start off by saying that, the title was interesting. I can't remember being a discussion on why 4G matters. So, to the mere fact we're asking the question kind of indicates that it's important. But, I think we've summarized 5G as a framework. A lot of the applications, a lot of the network management of a lot of the implementation it relies on AI, but 5G is the framework that enables these capabilities. You need the latency, you need the performance, you need the standardization, you need perhaps even opening up some of the more traditional interfaces, these things. So, I think, but what we haven't talked a lot about is the amount of data that's being generated through this enablement of 5G, anytime, any place, anywhere data. So what's really happening is this compute capability has to be enhanced dramatically to enable 5G. And so I think really going forward, it's interesting. You can think about the new unit of compute is really a data center. You need the compute capability, you need the acceleration, you need the interfaces, you need the speeds and feeds. And so that new unit of compute being the data center means you have to have data centers everywhere. It was touched on earlier, base station be a data center, an near edge, next general NGCO being a data center. So this is, I think, part of this symbiotic era that we're in, which is the framework of 5G connecting to a data center anywhere, and then layering onto that the enablement of AI for the applications that run anytime, any place, anywhere, depending on where you are in the network, but also to manage the network, to manage the spectral efficiency, to enable these things. This is kind of this confluence of factors that has never been seen before. And I think that's where we really have a tremendous opportunity in creation of new business models, creation of new capabilities, and really advancing some of the things that we're seeing today, whether it be in the medical field, the factories, the productivity of people as they're connecting, and then their user experience and the in the leisure lives as well. A tremendous opportunity of new applications is opened up by this confluence of factors.
Absolutely. Again, fantastic job sort of summarizing it. The takeaway I heard from you was sort of what I had mentioned before, is we're just in this era of multiplied innovation. And I think to what you're saying, you know, maybe in the LTE, you know, what year was it? 2007, 8, you know, when this LTE was first coming to the fore, did we have this type of discussions? You know, it was maybe not. And 5G, I think there's a lot of potential that people do see. And so the multiplied innovation will be amazing to watch play out, because, you know, to steal a term, I use this term from our friends over in the biology world. The recombinant use of technology is almost impossible to predict. You just know there's going to be a change. There has to be. And then what is the platform that helps support that change? So first off, yeah, this is the time in this discussion where first I want to thank the panelists. You know, again, when I first saw the request, you know, let's talk about why 5G matters in a world of IoT, VR, AR, VR, AI, and edge. And I said, oh no, how are we going to cover all this? But I think we did an okay job at you know, diving deep into each of these. But then again, you know, not forgetting where 5G, the story, meets all these. And again, from the IDC perspective, we're in this era of multiplied innovation. You know, how do we combine these technologies? How does 5G act as a platform, as an enabler? How do, you know, just the pure intersection of all of it can be very complex. And again, you know, I see all three of these companies sort of helping not only, you know, educate the market, but actually solve the problem. So first off, thank you for all joining today. And I think that's it.